voice of your Son speaking to us. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So, I want to give thanks to Daryl Johnson, who is a pastor to me, for this morning, and he has a incredible way of speaking that this is just his heart in this morning. I said last week that we're going to cover 2 weeks of kind of a preamble or a subset before we get back into Peter, where we're starting to speak of holiness. And I said, because it's so important with holiness, the challenge is it so quickly becomes something that makes us self-righteous. And that's what we looked at last week, and I'm going to tie it a bit more together in a couple weeks. But today I also want to speak about the right motivation for holiness. And we've been talking about it in the first 12 verses of 1 Peter a lot. But I want to give Peter's story that kept him grounded and kept him, I believe, from ever wanting to be a religious person in his life again, even though he did have one dance with that Paul had to confront him on. So, I got my make down, so just bear with me for those on Zoom. So again, we looked at arm movements, right? We looked at the chest, hands in the chest, which represented judgmentalism, the finger pointing to myself, where it's all about me and my rights. And then there was the pick and choose, pointing finger, I want you, don't want you, skip you. That I want to relate to those that I like or can help me get what I want. Then there's the closed hand that says, I'll take a bit of Jesus, but really I'm bringing the rest of this with me. I don't want to give my life up to him, really. And very quickly that can become a closed fist. And there's one more for today. And I don't know how to quite do this, but I'm going to kind of do it like this. Kind of hands in the pocket, dejected. Hands in the pocket, dejected. Our text for today is John 21, 1 to 19. I don't know about you, but the Easter Sunday seems like a century ago already. Again, it's only 3 weeks ago, but I don't even remember it. And it's sad. And so this is actually a little bit later than where this is about a week, maybe 2 weeks after Jesus was raised from the dead. And I want to invite you. He's in Galilee. Let me just read you the text, and then we will comment on it. John 21, 1 to 19. After this, Jesus appeared again to the disciples, this time at the Sea of Galilee. This is how he did it. Simon Peter, Thomas, named the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the brothers Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. Simon Peter announced, "I'm going fishing." The rest of them replied, "We're going with you." And they went out and got in the boat, and they caught nothing that night. When the sun came up, Jesus was standing on the beach, but they did not recognize him. Jesus spoke to them, "Good morning. Did you catch anything for breakfast?" They answered, "No." He said, "Throw the net on the right side of the boat and see what happens." They did what he said. All of a sudden, there were so many fish in it they weren't strong enough to pull it in. Then the disciples that Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Master!" When Simon Peter realized that it was the Master, he threw on some clothes, for he was stripped down for work, and he dove into the sea. The other disciples came in by boat, for they weren't very far from land, 100 yards or so, and they pulled along the net full of fish. When they got out of the boat, they saw a fire laid, with fish and bread cooking on it. Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." Simon Peter joined them and pulled the net to shore. 153 fish. Even with all those fish, the net didn't rip. Jesus said, "Breakfast is ready." Not one of the disciples asked, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Master. Jesus then took the bread and he gave it to them. And he did with the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus had shown himself to the disciples since being raised from the dead. After breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, I should say, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Master, you know I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." He then asked a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Master, you know I love you." Jesus said, "Shepherd my sheep." Then he said a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was upset that he asked for the third time, "Do you love me?" So he answered, "Master, you know everything there is to know. You've got to know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Two basic questions need to be asked when it comes to this text. The first one is, do you believe that Jesus is alive? That Jesus, the Son of Mary, that Jesus, the friend of sinners, that Jesus, the healer, that Jesus, the whatever blank you want to fill in, do you believe that Jesus is alive? Because, as I said on Easter Sunday, for the New Testament authors, it comes down to that question. As Paul said, if Jesus is not alive, we're the most pathetic people on earth as Christians. So, ask yourself that question. Do you believe Jesus is alive? You don't have to answer it aloud. The second question is, if he is alive, what difference does his being alive make today? In other words, what are the consequences today, now, if he is alive? I believe he is with all my heart. I believe he is. There's not a day goes by that I don't think about that. You see, Jesus is not the late, great, mighty one. He is alive. He is forevermore. And because, and this is what I want you to hear, because he is alive, Johnson says, our past, our present, and our future is wonderfully transformed. Because Jesus is alive, our past, our present, and our future is wonderfully transformed, radically changed. In other words, Jesus' resurrection puts a new spin on my future. Jesus' resurrection puts a new spin on the present. But Jesus' resurrection also puts a new spin on my past. Because Jesus lives, we who believe in him by faith have a new future. Death no longer has the last word over the future. It is the second last word. The very last word is life. Life. Sue's just been given her death sentence. Sue Marston. Right? She's got pancreatic cancer. They're going to make her comfortable. She has this little time to live, whatever that might be, God knows. As we sat this week, the day after her hearing the news that she knew but heard it scientifically, which a doctor in her needs that. The realization hit her. I'm going home. all that I believed in, all I've declared all my life is coming to fruition. That is what we hold on to. That we have a hope beyond this life. And because Jesus lives, we who believe in him by faith also have a new present. Like not a new car, okay? I'm not talking that kind of a present. I'm talking now. Every moment of every day can be lived in companionship with him. We are never alone. So contrary to maybe what our emotions feel like, or that, I don't feel Jesus, or contrary to whatever we may think, we are never alone. There is a new way. Whatever we may encounter in life as believers, Jesus is with you. It's the third one, though, that's a bit interesting, that we're looking at today. Because Jesus lives, we who believe in him by faith have a new past. It sounds strange, but that is what the risen Jesus was giving to Peter in our passage today that we just read. According to John, this is the third time that Jesus showed himself to the disciples. 2019, we hear that Jesus enters a locked room through the walls and presents himself to the disciples, the risen Christ. A few verses later, in verse 24, 1 week later, Jesus comes into a locked room, assuming again through the walls, or however his resurrection body allows him, and encounters Thomas. And then this is the third time. This time, the first two times he was in Jerusalem. This time he's in Galilee. Jesus shows himself to Peter and to 6 other disciples. But for John, and I believe for Jesus, Jesus showing up was all for Peter's sake that day. Peter was often singled out by Jesus. And it's interesting, in Mark's account of the resurrection, the angel says to the ladies who met this angel, said, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples." That's all they needed to say. That included everyone. Yes, Michael?
There's someone on Zoom said they can't hear you because you're muted. can you turn your camera a little bit this way? You're kind of
There?
That's it.
There we go. Good. Okay. All he needed to do was say disciples, and that would have covered everyone. But what does he say? He says, go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. Even there, Jesus says that Jesus is going to be going to Galilee, and he says, and to Peter. Make sure Peter knows it. I'm coming for him. It's interesting that Jesus didn't right away deal with Peter. He waited 2 weeks, 2 awkward weeks for Peter to process a bit. Two weeks. Peter, having had those 2 weeks, says, I'm going to fish. He goes fishing. He returns to his old way of life. Is it that hard to imagine that Peter would go back to his old way of life after seeing the resurrected Jesus twice? I don't think so. Are we not just as quick to go back to our old patterns of living? We can have a spiritual high one day where it's so amazing, like our hopes, and we just encounter Jesus the very next day. We can find ourselves going back to our old ways of living. You know, we sing all kinds of wonderful declarations about Jesus, that he is King and Lord of all, that he is seated at the right hand of God. Yet we can so quickly return to our old ways of living without Jesus as our Lord and Master, as our lover. Is this volume okay? Should I turn it up? Okay. Hello? Better? Good? Okay. Peter's response about I'm going fishing makes the Bible all the more believable, because it's real life. And you have to understand, there was no precedent for a man being raised from the dead. So their perception of reality did not change overnight. Jesus had told them several times that he would be crucified and raised from the dead, but they did not know what to do with it all.
We are standing on holy ground, and I know
comfortable. It was fishing. More so, though, for Peter, right? Why more so for Peter? Because he was no longer worthy of a relationship with the risen Lord. You see, he not only ran away with as the other disciples did when Jesus was arrested after his bold attempt to use his sword. He also denied Jesus 3 times. I do not know the man. I do not know the man. I do not know the man. Now get whatever. Have you ever felt that way? Luke tells us that Peter could see Jesus from where he was standing in the courtyard when he denied Jesus the 3rd time. And after he denied Jesus a 3rd time, the rooster crowed, just as Jesus said it would happen. And Jesus, we are told, turned and looked at Peter in the eye. He could not forget what he had done. More importantly, Peter could not forget Jesus' eyes. Gotta wonder what those eyes were telling, what those eyes showed. I think I know, but we're not told. Peter could not forgive himself. The guilt and the shame of his past kept Peter from entering into the joy of Jesus' resurrection and what it meant. Please know that he believed Jesus was alive, right? The first question we asked today, he could say, yeah, he's alive. I believe it with all my heart. Again, in Peter's case, it was not just confusion that caused him to return to fishing. In other words, trying to figure out what this resurrection meant. In his mind, he was no longer worthy of a relationship with the risen Lord. Peter believed he was alive, but he was unable to enter into that new and present future because of a haunting past. So, he retreated into what he knew best, to what helped him feel competent, comfortable. I am going fishing. We all know this. We all know this being held back from experiencing the gospel. We all know this, of experiencing the gospel in the present and the future. We can say yes to those things, but experientially of experiencing the gospel, the freedom in the present and in the future, is often stymied because of something that's happened in the past. Regret or guilt by past actions, memories of terrible things that terrible, awful things that have happened to us. Some of us are bitter by past hurts and can't get back beyond that, and they hold us back. Oh yes, we believe that Jesus is alive, that he is Lord of all. We believe that he loves us, that he loves me, that he is here. And yet, there is something in my past that keeps me from receiving. Peter was not able to enter into what he knew to be true because of his unresolved past. He could not embrace this new future and this new present because of this unresolved past. And this is why the risen Jesus showed himself to Peter the way he did in John 21. Oh, the beauty and the amazingness of how God orchestrated things, showed his care for Peter, and how he shows his care for us in so many different ways that we are often maybe even oblivious to. Oh, the amazing way he did it for Peter. He appeared to Peter in Galilee by that beach to set Peter free. Could have done it before. Why now? Because the beach by the Sea of Galilee is the best place for Peter's healing. It was at that same beach that Jesus first made sense to Peter in Matthew 4:18. Because that is where Jesus first called him to leave fishing for fish and instead follow him and become a fisher of people. It was 3 years before where he met Jesus for the very first time. And Luke tells us in Luke 5 that Jesus was on the beach teaching the multitudes, and there were 2 boats on the shore with the fishermen washing their nets beside. And Luke tells us that he got into Peter's boat, asked him to push him out a little from the shore, and it was from Peter's boat that he taught the people. And when he had finished, he told Peter, listen, can you just put out into the deep water and then let the nets down for a catch? And Peter replied, Master, we worked hard all night and didn't catch a thing, and I can hear him say, and what are you, a carpenter, telling us what to do? We're fishermen. We know what we're doing. But maybe he didn't think that. I just think that I would think that. But he didn't. What he did say is, but if you say so, if you tell us to do that, I'll let the nets down again. And this time their nets were so full of fish that they began to tear. And a shout for help brought their partners in from the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. Note the second story, by the way, the one from John 21. There was only one boat out there that we know of, and they couldn't get it into the boat. They had to literally sail in, or whatever, however they got in, using the paddles or whatever it was, and they just dragged the net behind. Can you imagine the resistance there? No wonder it took them a while to get back to shore, even though it was 100 yards away.
And the net didn't tear.
And the net didn't tear, exactly.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is that a symbolism of the changes in Peter? See, in the first story, he had to be helped, and his net tore. But in the second story, he didn't have to be helped. He just dove in and went to the master, and the net didn't tear.
I mean, you can certainly play with that. I don't think so, and I think the reason is because of what this is about Jesus' grace and mercy, and Jesus bringing healing. So it was about God's goodness to them, is how I would classify that. But
that could be part of the
that could be
net
part
not
of it.
tearing.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
what
Show
I meant.
God's goodness.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yes.
I just saw that. He
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah. We all. Just a second. Where am I here? Yeah, I know. I just got to find my spot.
Sorry.
That's okay.
You're
When
right.
Peter realized what had happened, no? Yeah, that's right. Okay. Peter fell to his knees, we are told, before Jesus, and he said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I am such a sinful man." Why? Because he was awestruck by the number of fish they caught, as were the others with him. In other words, grabbing Jesus' feet, he told him to depart because I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner. And what did Jesus say? Follow me. He gave to Peter the opportunity to follow him, to be his disciple. At the beginning of the journey, at the beach, Peter had discovered grace, that Jesus calls us into discipleship, that he calls us while we were still sinners. Do not be afraid from now on, he said the first time to Peter when he called him. You will be fishing for men. But that was 3 years ago. That was before Peter denied Jesus. And that threefold denial disqualified him from catching people, right? Have you ever felt that way? But now the second time, Jesus finds Peter on that same beach. Jesus is taking Peter back to the place where it all began. Back to his original encounter 3 years ago. In other words, he is taking Peter back to grace. Grace that means you can start over again and again and again. I love what Jesus does in John 21, and it's interesting. A lot of the translations don't have it. They call it friends or they call it something else. But when Jesus calls out to them the second time, he uses a Greek word that stands for children. Children, have you caught any fish? Children, as in the meaning my children, my brothers and sisters, and they replied no. Then he told them, get up, get out on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. And they did, and they couldn't haul it in. And it was that time that Jesus, the disciple who loved Jesus, said to Peter, it is the Lord. And in typical Peter fashion, he acted before he thought. It's the Lord. And this is the amazing thing, because he was still excited to see Jesus, right? This was the resurrected Jesus. He just didn't think he was qualified anymore to be his fisher of people. So he just threw on some clothes, because that's what you do, and then he swam to shore before the others. And when he gets there, he finds Jesus had prepared breakfast for the group. What a picture, by the way. Even after the resurrection, Jesus is still serving. Verse 9 tells us that he had prepared a breakfast over a charcoal fire. John doesn't use throwaway words in his gospel. So why was it a charcoal fire? Not just any old fire, but a charcoal fire. Because the part of Peter's past that kept Peter from going forward involved a charcoal fire. You see, Jesus is reenacting, if you want to call it, two different events. One is Peter's initial calling, thus being in the Sea of Galilee, fishing, etc., etc. The other is being in the courtyards of the temple, where for the last time, as Peter sat around the charcoal fire warming up, he denied Jesus the third time. And it was where Jesus then looked into Peter's eyes. Can you imagine Peter's memory returning of his denial? The shame, the guilt, the awfulness, the pain, the emotion it would have caused. I mean, he had been already thinking of this probably for 2 weeks. I denied him. I denied him. And now, there is Jesus before a charcoal fire looking into Peter's eyes. The resurrected Jesus. Just a couple weeks before that time, the soon-to-be crucified Jesus looked at him as Peter was by a charcoal fire. Can you feel the tension of that moment? Darrell Johnson believes that Jesus intentionally set up the charcoal fire on the beach to force Peter to deal with the unfinished business of his past. Jesus meets Peter at the point of his past that keeps him from personally entering into the present reality and the future reality of the resurrection. You see, we need to be careful when we run from pain, because not all pain is destructive. It can be for liberation and wholeness. Some pain might just be the doing of the great soul doctor. So let's watch this doctor go to work. Let's watch Jesus go to work. The fire brings the memories of a slave girl who asked Peter, "Do you know this man?" To which Peter says, "I do not." Jesus catches Peter's eyes. "Simon, do you love me more than these?" Who is these? We don't know. But I think it's do you love me more than that which makes you feel comfortable, more competent? Do you love me more than fishing? Peter responds, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." How will Jesus respond? "If you love me, then why did you deny me?" No. Jesus, looking at Peter, says, "Tend my lambs." What? Me? Me? You're going to let me? Me who denied you? You let me tend your lambs? Then a second glance into the fire, to the second denial. A soldier, this time asking, "Were you not one of the disciples? His disciples?" "I am not." And in Galilee, again, Jesus catches Peter's eyes and he says, "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you," he says. Again, how will Jesus respond to that? "What am I supposed to do with disciples like you? You are so useless, so finicky, so whatever." No. He says, "Shepherd my sheep." What? Me? Me? Who failed you? You're going to entrust your sheep to me? And then the third glance into the fire, to the third denial. This time it's a servant of the high priest challenged him. This servant had a relative who had his ear cut off by Peter. So there was some inside information going on here. "Did I not see you with Jesus in the garden?" this person asked him. Peter's response was a swear word and denied Jesus for a third time. And now in Galilee, for a third time, Jesus catches his eyes. "Do you love me?" And Peter is grieved by this. Like, why this persistence? But you see, it's because Peter doesn't understand what's going on here. Peter was a pretty black and white person. I've said it once. I don't need to say it again. "You know all things, Lord. You know that I love you," he says. So surely now Jesus is going to lower the boom. But no, he doesn't. "Tend my sheep." What? You're going to entrust your sheep to me, your church to me. And then Peter hears those two words, the same words that he heard at the beginning. What were they? Anyone? What does Jesus say to Peter? "Follow me." what was said at the beginning hasn't changed. The invitation, the command is still the same. Follow me. I know what you've done. I know where you've been. Follow me. It's interesting because John uses Peter's name in John. It's Peter, right? And for those of you who don't know, that Peter was actually called Simon. That was his core name. And Jesus, in Matthew 18, gave him a new name. He said in Matthew 18, Simon, I know who you are, that you are shifting sand, because that's what Simon meant. But I am calling you, shifting sand, to follow me. And the new name that Peter was given meant the rock. The rock. Jesus has now healed Peter by giving him a new past. From now on, whenever Peter would see a charcoal fire, and he would have seen them a lot, maybe not every day, but for sure weekly, the sight of the charcoal fire would have reminded him of his denial, but more important, it would remind him of Jesus calling him. It would not bring shame, but love and mercy and grace and commissioning to tend his sheep. Do you see what Jesus did here? He orchestrated this encounter with Peter in order to allow Peter to receive God's amazing grace. You know, we sing that song, we're about to sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And we think of that as the person who first comes to faith, like John Newton did, who wrote it. But it's a song that can be applicable at various times in our life. In fact, it's a song that should be our call, our voice. Amazing grace. How sweet that sound is. That saved a wretch like me. So what is it? What is it that holds me back from entering into and enjoying life with Jesus? What is it that holds you back from entering into and enjoying life with Jesus? What is my charcoal fire? You see, Jesus wants to invite us to stop running, to not have to go fishing, back to what we used to do, how we used to live. We can let the risen Savior meet with us at that past that we can't seem to let go of. And with open hands, I want to invite us right now to ask Him to meet us in that guilt and in that shame. And maybe it's anger or bitterness or fear or failure or moral failure, a memory, a wrong decision, whatever it might be. Our good news is that Jesus is alive, that He is here in the present. He will be there in the future, but He also is in our past to bring hope and healing. As Paul declares, listen, God doesn't waste a single thing. He takes that and He uses it for His glory. So what is your charcoal fire? What is your moment of hiding, of embarrassment, of wondering how can you still serve, follow? What's holding you back? Jesus is there at your charcoal fire. He is there. He knows. He is not surprised. And he asks the question, do you love me? And the invitation is for us to respond, to listen to what he says to you. That's what I died for. You are forgiven. I want to give you a new past. Will you let me? I'm going to invite Chris to come, and she's going to play quietly Amazing Grace, and I'm going to invite us just to be quiet, and then we're going to sing the song.